Hi everyone, I'm back again with a new video on a new topic, the development of the diaphragm, which is very important to know and is frequently asked in the exams. I'm Dr. Sharna Moin, and today in this video I will describe the origin and the developmental sources of the diaphragm, the process of the development, the timeline of the development, and at the end of the video we will also understand why the diaphragm has a particular type of nerve supply. And I think this video will help you. So without wasting any more time, let's get started. Before jumping into the video, I want to request everyone that please do subscribe my channel if you think these videos are helping you, because your support inspires me a lot. Okay, so we know that the diaphragm is a skeletal muscle, and we also know that all the muscles of the body are coming from the mesoderm. So obviously, without any doubt, we can say the diaphragm is also coming from the mesoderm. Now, what is mesoderm? Mesoderm is one of the germ layers of the embryo. The embryo has 3 germ layers, and I've drawn this figure showing 3 germ layers for a better understanding. The germ layers are the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm. Ecto lies outside, endo lies inside, and the meso lies in the middle, in between them. Different layers give rise to different structures. Like the ectoderm, they give rise to the outer lining epithelium of the skin. The endoderm, they give rise to the inner lining epithelium of different organs. And the mesoderm, they give rise to all types of muscles of the body, like the skeletal muscle or the smooth muscle, all types of muscles, and also the blood vessels and connective tissues, of course. So, being a skeletal muscle, the diaphragm is also coming from the middle layer, that is the mesoderm. So this is understandable that all the developmental sources of the diaphragm that are taking part in the formation of the diaphragm, they're coming from this layer. And already in my previous video, we have seen the diaphragm has 4 developmental sources. They're the septum transversum, then we have the pleuroperitoneal fold, the esophageal mesentery, a very important structure, and we have the muscular ingrowth of the body wall. As I've said earlier, all these structures are coming from the mesoderm, and then they will come together and will fuse with each other to form the diaphragm. So that is all about the origin and the developmental sources of the diaphragm. Now let us talk about the process of the development. This is a picture of an embryo of 17 days, and this is the cranial end, and we have the caudal end here. We can also see the amniotic cavity and the yolk sac cavity below. We also have the pericardial cavity here, and they have represented the ectoderm with the blue color, and the red structure is the mesoderm, and we also have the endoderm in yellow. So this is ectoderm, and everything in red is the mesoderm, and the yellow colored structure is the endoderm. Around day 22, the mesoderm that lies above the pericardial cavity, they become thickened as the septum transversum, and we will understand more clearly if we see the next picture. I've collected this picture from the internet, and I did not find any other better picture, and I found this figure with this cross mark. Sorry about that. Anyways, what I was trying to say, this is the mesoderm. You can see, so this is the mesoderm and the pericardial cavity, and around day 22, the mesoderm just above the pericardial cavity, they become thickened as the septum transversum. So this septum transversum here, this is actually a thickened mesoderm, and initially it lies above the pericardial cavity. But the thing is, the embryo does not always remain in this particular position. At the beginning, the embryo is pretty much straight, but they start folding during the 4th week of development. See, it has already started folding. This picture is actually showing the craniocaudal folding. The craniocaudal means the cranial end and the caudal end, they start folding towards each other, okay? Oh, it's raining. Very nice. Anyways, we were saying that during the craniocaudal folding, the septum transversum cranial to the pericardial cavity, it slowly comes down, at first in front, and then assumes a position caudal to the pericardial cavity at the level of the cervical vertebra. the cervical somites. So in the next picture they have shown the longitudinal section of the embryo of different stages. This is the cranial end and we have the caudal end here, and this is the ventral or the front portion, and this is the back or the dorsal portion, and we can see the heart tube here. And now at this stage the septum transversum is below the heart with the pericardial cavity. It is situated at the level of the cervical somites. So these are the somites on the back, and this is the cervical region above, and then we have the thoracic region, and below we have the lumbar region, or the lumbar somites I mean. During the subsequent weeks, the dorsal portion of the embryo, it grows much faster than the ventral part, resulting in an apparent descent of the septum transversum. What I mean is, look at the picture. The ventral portion is not growing that fast, and the septum transversum is situated in the ventral part, so this is not changing its position. But on the other hand, the dorsal part is growing much faster. So the cervical somites present here, they go up in the higher position. See, they were present here, but for the growth they went up in the higher position. Okay, and for the same reason the thoracic somite and the lumbar somite, they also come up in higher position. The septum transversum is now situated in front of the thoracic somites at the 8th week of development, and then in front of the thoracic and lumbar somites. This is not due to the growth or descent of the septum transversum, but for the faster growth of the dorsal portion of the embryo. Now the septum transversum starts growing posteriorly. See, they have represented the septum transversum with the purple color. I think this is purple. Yep, it grows posteriorly, but it stops at the level of the foregut and forms the primitive diaphragm between the pericardial cavity and the peritoneal cavity. So I have drawn this figure again for a better understanding, and I've tried to show the septum transversum here, and this is the esophagus, I mean the foregut. So the septum transversum grows posteriorly up to the level of the foregut, and we can see here that the septum transversum closes the pericardio-peritoneal canal partially. This is another view of this figure. Above we have the thoracic cavity, and below we have the abdominal cavity. In the thoracic cavity we have the heart and the lungs, and the heart has the pericardial cavity around it, and the lungs has the pleural cavity, and in the abdomen we have the peritoneal cavity. So initially they were connected with each other by the pericardio-peritoneal canal, and we can say that the growth of the septum transversum, it closes the pericardio-peritoneal canal partially. On the both sides in the back we have the lung has the pleural cavity. The cavities still remain connected with the peritoneal cavity below. This canal is also known as the pleuroperitoneal canal. So we can see behind we have the pleuroperitoneal canal, which is still not closed. This septum transversum, now the primitive diaphragm in front, later will form the central tendon of the diaphragm. We also have the dorsal mesentery of the esophagus on the back. This picture is showing the mesentery of the GI tract. On the ventral side we have the ventral mesentery, on the dorsal side we have the dorsal mesentery. The upper portion of the esophagus, it does not have any mesentery, only the caudal portion is having it. This is more clear in this picture. There is no mesentery in the upper part of the esophagus. The mesentery starts from the caudal end of the esophagus. This is actually a double layer of peritoneum, and we can become more clear if we see this diagram from Langman's Embryology. Don't be scared of this picture. All we have to know for now is that the blue one is the ectoderm, the red one, this is the mesoderm, and the yellow colored thing, this is the endoderm. In the next picture it is showing that the mesoderm, it has three parts: the medial part, the lateral part, and the intermediate part, and the lateral part is known as the lateral plate of the mesoderm. So some gaps are appearing in the lateral plate mesoderm. In the next picture we can see that the lateral plate mesoderm ultimately splits into two layers: the parietal layer and the visceral layer. The parietal layer is also known as the somatic layer. The visceral layer is also known as the splanchnic layer of the lateral plate mesoderm. Next, this is the mesoderm, and we can see there's two layers of the lateral plate mesoderm. So this is the parietal layer, which is folding inwards, and this is the visceral layer. Okay, so in the next picture This is the parietal layer, and this is the visceral layer. These two portions are coming towards each other, and in the middle the foregut is developing. So in the next picture we can see, just like before, the parietal layer. See, this is the parietal layer, the red layer here. This is the parietal layer, and inside we had the visceral layer. So this is the visceral layer, okay, of the mesoderm, and this is the viscera, that is the foregut. Okay, so on the back we have the dorsal mesentery of this gut tube, okay, and this dorsal mesentery, this is actually a double layered peritoneum. See, there is one layer which is coming and then covering up the viscera and then going back. So on the back we have two layers, so that is actually a double layered peritoneum, and is known as the dorsal mesentery of the gut tube, which in case of esophagus is known as the dorsal mesentery of the esophagus, and obviously this is coming from the mesoderm. Therefore, the dorsal mesentery of esophagus is also mesodermal in origin, and it appears around 4th week of development. This dorsal mesentery of esophagus will ultimately form the crus on the median portion of the diaphragm. So accordingly, the septum transversum will give rise to the central tendon, and the dorsal mesentery of the esophagus will form the crus and the median portion of the diaphragm, and I will tell you how it happens in a minute. But for now, this is just the dorsal mesentery which has fused with the septum transversum, and there is still a connection between the pleural cavity above and the abdominal cavity below, which is the pleuroperitoneal canal. During the 5th week, from the dorsolateral wall of each pleuroperitoneal canal, mesodermal ridge grows as the pleuroperitoneal fold, which later is known as the pleuroperitoneal membrane. They grow ventromedially and will fuse with the septum transversum and with the dorsal mesentery of the esophagus around the 7th week of development. Now the main part happens. Similar to trunk and the limb muscle cells of the diaphragm are coming from the somites. Now what is the somite? As we have seen earlier, the middle red layer is the mesoderm, and we have said that it has 3 portions: the medial portion, the intermediate portion, and the lateral portion. The medial portion of the mesoderm is a little bulged, and this portion is known as a somite. So they give rise to the muscle cells of the diaphragm. Studies showed that the muscle progenitors of the diaphragm originate from the cervical somites, likely cervical 3, 4, and 5 somites. The red things you can see here, these are the somites. So the muscle progenitor cells, they have represented with the red dots. So these things are the muscle progenitor cells. They are coming from the cervical 3, 4, and 5 somites. And also the phrenic nerve axons are coming from the neural tube of that region. The muscle progenitor cells, they migrate from the cervical 3, 4, and 5 somites, and also the axons from the neural tube of that particular region, they migrate to the diaphragm, to the developing diaphragm. See the septum transversum here, and we have seen that on the back portion of the septum transversum we have the pleuroperitoneal fold. The target of their migration is the pleuroperitoneal fold, and this is shown clearly in this picture. These are the somites, and from the somites we can see the red dots, the muscle progenitor cells. They are migrating to the pleuroperitoneal fold, which is also known as the PPF. And just like the muscle progenitor cells, the nerve axons are also migrating from the neural tube. So this is the neural tube, and they are the somites, okay? Anyways, after reaching the pleuroperitoneal folds, the rounded muscle progenitor cells, they change their shape and they differentiate into the myoblasts. And so it was rounded at first. The cells were rounded, and then they became a little more fusiform, and these fusiform cells are known as the myoblast. And these myoblasts, they differentiate into the myotubes, and these myotubes together are forming the muscle fibers or the myocytes. Here we can see that there are a few myoblast cells, so they actually fuse with each other to form a myotube, and these tubes are fusing with each other to form a single muscle cell or the muscle fiber. And this picture explains why the muscle cells are multinucleated. This picture is collected from the John Crear's Basic Histology, and this is a very nice illustration. Anyways, what we were saying, that the myocytes, they differentiate into the myoblast, and they differentiate into the myotubes. These myotubes together are forming the myocytes, and the myocytes are forming the muscular portion of the diaphragm. So see, ultimately this whole thing, the muscular portion of the diaphragm. And I want to add a little information here, that when the muscle progenitor cells they reach the pleuroperitoneal fold, in that time the septum transversum and the pleuroperitoneal fold, they are located at the level of the cervical somites, that is the cervical 3, 4 and 5. However, the folds and the folds and the septum transversum, they apparently descend caudally. Okay, so they are no longer present in front of the cervical somites. This explains why the diaphragm is supplied by the nerves of the cervical region. They are present in the thoracic and lumbar region. So that's it. And remember the dorsal mesentery of the esophagus. Some of the myoblasts also migrate into the dorsal mesentery of the esophagus and forms the myofibers in the same process. The myofibers that are growing into the dorsal mesentery of the esophagus will ultimately form the crus and the median portion of the diaphragm. And there is also a contribution from the muscular ingrowth of the body wall. Just a little portion here. So this was a body wall before, and there is a little ingrowth from this body wall. And I've drawn another figure for a better understanding, and I've tried to represent the heart in the middle, heart with the pericardial cavity, and these are the lungs, and we have the body wall on the both sides, lateral body wall. And in the first picture I've drawn the septum transversum in the middle. So on the both sides we can see that the peritoneal cavity is connected with the pleural cavity, with the pleuroperitoneal canal. Okay, and in the next picture we can see that the pleuroperitoneal fold has already developed, and so this is the primitive diaphragm. Here there is a septum transversum in the middle, then on the both sides in the peripheral region we have the pleuroperitoneal fold, and at the most peripheral side we have the a little ingrowth of the muscular portion of the body wall. And this lateral body wall is also coming from the mesoderm. Remember this picture of the body cavities that we saw a few minutes ago? We have seen that this is the parietal layer and this is the visceral layer of the lateral plate mesoderm. So the red thing is mesoderm, and these two things are fusing with each other. Here they have already fused in the next picture, and this is the body wall. Okay, and this is the body cavity, and inside the body cavity we have the viscera. So the body wall is formed by the parietal layer of the lateral plate mesoderm. Okay, so this lateral body wall is coming from the mesoderm. So at this stage the ingress from the body wall occupies a very small area in the peripheral portion of the primitive diaphragm. Next, I have drawn a scenario of 9 to 12 weeks of development. During this time, the lungs and the pleural cavities enlarge, and they start to invade the lateral body walls, and they literally burrow into the body wall tissue and split the mesoderm or the mesenchyme into two layers, the outer layer and the inner layer. The outer layer will form the true body wall, and the inner layer will form the peripheral portion of the diaphragm. Oops, I forgot to color here. Just give me a second. Magic. Anyways, what we were saying, outer layer was forming the body wall and the inner layer was forming the peripheral portion of the diaphragm, which will be further pushed towards the midline. At this time, the pleuroperitoneal membrane in blue color, they become very small. Alternatively, the muscular ingress of the body wall, they will take a bigger place. Therefore, the pleuroperitoneal membrane had a major contribution in the early fetal life, but in the late fetal period, there is a huge contribution from the muscular ingress of the body wall, and pleuroperitoneal membrane, they become very small. This also explains why the peripheral portion of the diaphragm are supplied by the lower intercostal nerves. Obviously, as this portion is actually a part of the lateral body wall, it will also be supplied by the nerves of the same region. So this is it, and this is another picture that I've collected from the internet. I've drawn the figures following this picture, but in addition I have just added two more figures where I have shown how the pleuroperitoneal folds are coming and how does the pericardial canal looks like. And yep, so now the timeline of the development. The septum transversum is coming from the mesoderm around day 22, and they grow up to the level of the esophagus. On the back side, we have the dorsal mesentery of the esophagus, which is also coming from the mesoderm, and it appears around the 4th week of development. Next, we have the pleuroperitoneal fold. This is also a mesodermal growth, and it starts growing ventromedially and will fuse with the septum transversum and with the dorsal mesentery of the esophagus around, I think, a 7th week of development. 7th week of development. And next we have the contribution from the muscular ingrowth of the body wall, and this is also mesodermal in origin. And in the early fetal period, we can see this contribution is less, and in the late fetal period, we can see that there is a huge contribution from the muscular ingrowth of the body wall, and the pleuroperitoneal membranes, they became very small. In the summary, we can say septum transversum is forming the central tendon of the diaphragm. The pleuroperitoneal membrane, these are forming the small peripheral part of the diaphragm. Muscular ingrowth of the lateral body wall, they're forming the large peripheral part of the diaphragm. And lastly, the dorsal mesentery of the esophagus, it is forming the crus and the median portion of the diaphragm. Crus or crus or crus, I don't know. Anyways, and all these structures are coming from the mesoderm. So that is it, guys. I hope this video helped you to understand the embryology. Please give a thumbs up if you have liked this video, and please do subscribe my channel. If you're interested to know more about the developmental defects of the diaphragm, then you can click on the video on the on the right side. So stay safe, everyone. See you all in my next video. Till then, take care and goodbye.